What's going on, San Antonio Spurs fans? Today, we're going to be doing a little bit of Pounding the Rock Spurs talk with one of my fellow Pounding the Rock writers, Jeph Duarte. How you doing today, Jeph?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about the Spurs, but in particular, we're going to be talking about the Austin Spurs. You know, they had a pretty good season this year. First time head coach Matt Nielsen led them to the playoffs, 10-5 record. So that was the best regular winning percentage they've ever had. We all know that their season ended after the very first playoff game. But I thought overall it was a pretty successful season. I want to talk about this roster, though. I think it was one of the most talented rosters that we've seen so far. Maybe in the history of the Austin Spurs. We'll talk about Tre and Quinndary and Woodard later on. But were there any guys on this roster who stood out to you as people who could potentially be playing in the NBA one day?
I may be watching these games through Spurs tinted glasses, but I felt like almost every guy had some sort of skill set that once expanded on could put them into the NBA. I particularly once the two guys headed back to the NBA, I thought, oh, their season's over. Like they don't, you just lost your two top scorers. And Cam Reynolds anchored that team. I mean, he was hitting from three. He was, controlling the pace. We're doing a lot of work out there. And I'd only gotten to see a taste of that in the preseason this year.
Yeah, no, I really like Cam too. He was a guy who kind of stood out to me. He's one of the older, if you want to call him older, he's I think a year older than me, so he can't be that old. But but he looked good. I thought he looked really good. Has like a very smooth offensive game. He could get his shot off the dribble. I think he was a better 3-point shooter than he showed, and that was one of the things I talked to him about in the press conferences. Was like, look, you only shot like 33%. But I think everyone knows he can shoot better if he wasn't the primary option, which he wouldn't be on the Spurs. Is there anything else you liked from him? I thought his defense was actually pretty solid.
The defense was great, and his assist. I don't know what the assist rate was, but in the games where he was taking over, I just felt like he was everywhere. He was passing it off, and if that guy didn't shoot, then he was getting it back on the 3-point line. He was even rebounding. I mean, he was doing a little bit of everything, which is what you want from a guy that's going to come up. He may not, obviously not going to jump into a starting position on a team, but coming to the Spurs, he would sit on the bench and learn a lot. Or going to a kind of a rebuilding team, an Eastern Conference team or something, he could find himself coming off the bench pretty quickly. Even I would think over the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, I was kind of surprised. Minnesota let him go. Now, I'm not trying to rag on the Timberwolves, but I kind of feel like they're not necessarily, as an organization, the best talent evaluators. They've let some guys go. They've take some guys in the draft that maybe were a little bit too early. But I was surprised he didn't stick with them. I think he has a game that you could see him in the NBA now. I'm sure there are other guys you like. I wanted to give another person who I thought was maybe worthwhile for a look. I liked Nate Renfro a
Yeah.
lot. He was kind of like a Swiss Army knife. The dude was like second on the team in assists per game, I think second in rebounds, led the team in blocks and steals. The only thing I can say with him is I don't think he has an NBA future if he cannot learn to shoot the ball.
Yeah.
Pretty much that's it. Like he just cannot shoot. Awful
Yeah.
shooting percentages. But besides that, I liked him. What did you think about Nate?
I felt the same way about Nate, but then I kind of, when you watch the G League games, it's it's a quicker pace than a lot of the NBA. They're younger guys. They are all not used to playing with each other in the same way an NBA team is. They don't have the same, especially this season. It was so truncated. You felt like they were almost in just the next level version of a pickup game. Like, okay, these guys are all here. They're going to get yanked. They're going to get moved. Someone's going to, and so you're playing more isolated. You're depending on yourself more as a player because you're also showcasing your talents. And so yeah, a guy who's not scoring does not look good in the G League. But then you move on to more defensive minded players in the NBA. There's a lot of 3-and-D guys. There's a lot of just D guys, and
Yeah, yeah.
again, coming to a team where you have two or three heavy 3-point shooters. I think of somebody like the Warriors. It's like they don't need another scorer. They need a guy who's going to plug up that defense, who's going to get those rebounds. And yeah, if you're the second assist guy on your team and you're playing good defense, then you can go to any team that's got a high volume of threes. He'd do something on the Rockets. Not now as Rockets, but when
Yeah.
they were just chucking up threes every 5 minutes. Well, a guy that rebounds and plays defense is going to go real far with them, and so again, it's hard to evaluate what kind of future he has, but he has the option of a future, which is saying a lot, because I watched only a handful of G League games. They only televised. If I could go back, I would have paid for the whole season, because they only aired a few. But I was watching other teams where I'm like, these guys don't have it together at all. Like the Spurs really had something going on, even in that fast pace sort of, I got to shoot it because I don't know that you can shoot it.
Yeah.
There were teams that I thought, like, and especially when they played like the Swarm or the Nets, that were already out. It was like, these guys don't even look like they have a cohesive plan on the court, and that was a little disappointing, because you see someone like Ray McCallum Jr., who's been playing for a long time, who even played with the Spurs, and I was like, he looks like he's digressed into the G League, where these other guys are moving up, and Renfro, definitely Renfro has that defensive capability. He's got a good IQ. I think he's got the good IQ. But yeah, what would benefit him most is a master class with Chip England. Just
Yeah.
working those
Yeah,
shots.
definitely. And I don't know if you knew this. He hadn't played basketball, organized basketball, in 2 years. He tore, I want to say, tore his ACL, training with the Suns for like a draft thing, and then he hadn't played basketball 2 years. So considering that, I thought he was pretty spectacular on both ends. Maybe I think, and this is hard to evaluate just because these guys are so unfamiliar with each other. So like saying he's not a great team defender may be harsh, because I don't know how familiar they are with each other, if they know where they need to be. The communication is obviously going to be, spotty, because they don't really know each other that well. They didn't even have a training camp that lasted more than, I think, 2 or 3 days. So
Yeah.
of course they're not going to be on the same page, but I thought he looked really good. I liked him. Is there anyone else who really stood out to you? I know for me, I had another guy, but I'd love to hear if you have anybody else who kind of stood out to you on the Spurs roster.
Absolutely. Kenny Williams. And again, I was limited in my games, but he shot 5 threes, I believe, against the Nets, and he just looked amazing. And I was fortunate enough to get to go to the summer league two summers ago in Salt Lake City, which is just 4 teams, and that was, for me, like, just kind of immersing myself in what sports journalists do. I'd never had that opportunity. I've barely, as a pounder, I've been able to do local interview type things, but not game type things. And so I'd gotten to see Kenny a couple years ago, and so it was great to see that he was, again, when you take Tre out of the equation, when you take Luka out of the equation, who's going to step up for you? And he was all over the place in that one game that I caught, and I felt like not just the shooting, but he was hot that game for sure. But again, a scout's going to see he can shoot it from anywhere. What's he doing? And again, in that run and gun pace, he was there. He was present. I didn't catch his assist rate on that, but I feel like he was getting all the shots in that game. But I was definitely impressed with him, and I'd like to see more of him in the next season.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think he's a guy who I left out of my list. But like we discussed at the beginning, I think this was a super deep roster compared to, almost any roster in the history. I'm looking guys like Anthony Mathis. You got Kyrie Thomas, London Parentes, Robinson Jr. I'm trying to think of other guys off the top of my head. They had Makoka, who was on assignment from the Chicago Bulls. They had
Yeah.
a ton of guys. Even Robert Woodard. You had Tre, and obviously they had Tre and Quinndary and Luka. But they're just a lot of really, I think, solid NBA caliber guys. But nobody else, I think, besides obvious guys like Kyrie Thomas, really stood out to me as like, maybe they have an NBA future. They could, work their way to an NBA future. But I really liked what I saw from this roster. And one of the things that I really liked from the Austin Spurs in general was just their ability, to, like you said, to look cohesive, because they had one of the lowest turnover rates in the G League, which is kind of cool, because the San Antonio Spurs also are super low on turnovers. And I know that Coach Matt Nielsen was saying he tried to run it as closely to San Antonio, but obviously you're right. Like the pace is super fast.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little more sloppy. The guys don't know each other as well. But I thought overall, like you said, in comparison to teams like the Swarm, the Nets, they looked pretty cohesive. They had some good chemistry on the court together, all things considered.
Well, that's kind of the genius of the Austin Spurs. I know that every team wants to develop their players and bring them up, but when you keep the structure so sound, that a player can get pulled from the Austin Spurs and sent up to San Antonio, and he knows the plays and he knows the expectation and he knows the role. Um, it makes that transition even easier. Now, again, moving to another team is going to be another thing, but I don't know if the Long Island Nets coaches build their play. In fact, for this one, I know that the Long Island coach was one of the Brooklyn assistants. Like, they moved him down just to do this series and then bring him back up. So maybe there was that same cohesiveness ideally, but the program from the Austin Spurs to the San Antonio Spurs stays, and Pop's consistency brings that in. I was a big fan of Blake Ahern. Loved what he did with the team in those years he was there, winning the championship. But again, you have someone like Derek White, who was blowing it up in the G League and then able to just pop right back in. I got to know Matt just through those few games, but and again, the bubble gives that relaxed feeling. It feels like you're just letting people play. Like, I love that they're not wearing suits anymore, that they're just kind of
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
It looks like let's just play some basketball. And Pop looked and acted different in the bubble last year, and I felt like Matt looked like Pop did. He was there, he was
yeah.
ready to go. He was giving his players feedback, but he wasn't berating people. He wasn't too stressed about it. He's really is developing these guys for what's next. And a lot of times their next step isn't with the Spurs, but it is going up. And that's a good thing. That's really positive. So I think the cohesiveness from G League to NBA has allowed for these players to kind of excel.
I totally agree. And I'm going to ask you. So you say, the next step isn't always with the Spurs, but, LaMarcus and the Spurs, everyone knows by now they decided to part ways. So that could give them potentially 2 roster spots, whether they trade him, whether they end up buying him out. Is there anybody of the guys who we listed who you would consider bringing onto the Spurs roster? Or do you think there's probably better options on the free agent market?
You know, it's tough because there's probably better options in the free agent market, but who wants a $24 million contract for just a few months? Um, I struggle with contracts because I don't understand. If you release the guy, you pay him. Well, why can't you trade him for less and just keep paying him anyway? Why couldn't you just say, okay, we'll take this other player? It doesn't work that way. But
Yeah.
if they released him, you're not going to replace him. You're not going to find, who are you going to get that's going to also be waived before the deadline that you want for like a playoff run? I think honestly, maybe it is time to bring up one of these guys, give him that shot, and take advantage of the fact that you have been developing these players. I mean, again, I don't know how tall is Renfro. I don't know how tall Renfro is, but
I believe he's 6'8". Yeah, I
yeah, so
believe he's
he would be
6'8".
more of he'd be more of a forward, but that was where LaMarcus was. You've got Pirtle in the starting lineup. You've got Eubanks, which again, Eubanks is a perfect example of a G League transition. The guy was a two-way player. He knew the program. He could step onto the court, and he's got blocks going on. He's got hooks going on. I mean, he looks great. The other thing about the G League transition is, do you notice that most of our of the San Antonio Spurs bench right now is G League? They've already played together. They have. I mean, they go out there and Lonnie lobs it to Eubanks. I mean, they're ready for that. They know already. They've got that court awareness, not just as a player but as a team. And so, bringing up another G League guy, maybe putting him in LaMarcus's role, but making him the third choice. Yeah, maybe immerse Renfro. Maybe you get him that sight awareness from sitting there, that osmosis from just sitting next to these guys. Um, I don't know that Pop's going to do that, but unless you're going to fill that spot, why not move somebody in that could really learn? I do want to say real quick the Kasabalu,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
that I only saw him in 2 games, and the first game he looked disoriented um, for the structure. He didn't seem to know what he was doing on the court with the Spurs, and by the second game that kind of had faded away. But the whole time he was aggressive. He was doing the intangibles. I watched the game again because I was like, what did I like about him? And it was stuff that didn't get stat. He was the second passer. He was setting really great picks. He was taking blocks off of other people, and I thought, again, in just 1 or 2 games, an impressive guy. Like, what's his next step? So yeah, I think the Spurs would be great to pull somebody in and give them that corporate knowledge, because you don't know how much it's going to turn around and benefit your team even a year or two later.
Yeah, and obviously, like the Spurs aren't the same as they used to be in terms of like their dominance of the NBA. But I mean, we've seen that with guys like Danny Green. I mean, I don't think anybody thought Danny Green was going to be this major contributor to a title team like he was for San Antonio. And I really like that you brought up Kasi Babu. He's a guy who definitely I overlooked on my first list here, but I kind of compared him to like a G League PJ Tucker. You know, he
Yeah.
sets those hard screens. He can make that second, third pass. He's gonna be able to not necessarily lock down guards. I don't think he has the same mobility, but he definitely is going to give the effort on the boards. He's going to give the effort on defense. And you're right. Like he looked discombobulated in that first game. And that was actually, I think if you caught that game, it might've been his very first game he played with Austin,
Yeah.
because he didn't play in every game.
Right.
And then that other game he came out and I think he made like 4 threes in one half, had like 3 blocks, 2 steals, 4 assists. So yeah, he's kind of a do-it-all guy too, kind of like Renfro. I like him a lot. And you mentioned it earlier, like this program is really unique. Like this Austin Spurs program is really unique, but what do you feel like makes it so much different from other programs? Because I can't remember if I brought this up at the beginning, but we've got 112 different former active players who've come through the Austin Spurs system and then appeared in at least one NBA game. And then also you have an Austin Spurs coaching tree. I mean, you got Taylor Jenkins, Blake Ahern, Brad Jones, Ken McDonald, Jason Frazier, Patrick Mutombo, Earl Watson, who obviously is not in the league anymore. And even executives like Landry Fields, Sean Marks. I mean, they're doing something right as an organization, not just with players, but with their staff as well.
Quinn Schneider.
Quinn, of course, yeah, I forgot him, but yeah, Quinn Snyder.
He just coached the All-Star game. Where
Yeah.
was he? G League. You know, I mean, it was like he was a Toros coach, I think.
Yeah.
Um, it's a hugely impressive tree, and again, I think that goes back to having the most consistent coach in all of NBA. You know, I mean, what is the 23rd season with Pop, and you've got the next two guys have less than 10 years of him on him. You know, you got Spoelstra and I just blanked on the Dallas
I think
Mavericks guy.
Carlisle.
Carlisle, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, and and after that, you have someone like Doc Rivers who has tons of coaching, but it's the recycling. It's like, okay, this isn't working, let's fire this guy. This isn't working, let's roll this guy out. And almost half the teams I could think of off the top of my head have a guy who's been in 2 or 3 other places already. And so you get consistency of a good coach, but you don't get the consistency of a culture. And we talk about it as Spurs fans and as Pounders. We talk about the culture a lot. I think Pop would take a less developed player with a really great attitude over a guy who is NBA ready, possible rookie of the year kind of guy. I think he would take that guy any day. And I go straight to someone like Derek White, who, underrated as a high school player, undersized as a high school player, played in like, a smaller, junior college level, and then moved his way up. But when you heard him talk, you thought that's Spurs material. And he is every single time he's asked to go out in public and honor a kid at a reading, event or speak or do anything, he does it. He just does it. And he's great. Lonnie Walker is one of the most Spurs players I've ever seen in my life. Just, I got the luxury of getting to follow him around while they were giving Thanksgiving turkeys out to families one year. And, there's a guy who has to do that. And then there's a guy who loves to do that. And you could see it in his eyes that he wanted to be a part of this. And I think it starts with Pop. I think it starts with, we always go back to what Pop and Tim had, and that's still relevant. That's still relevant right now. And then you expand through the entire NBA. There's not one team that doesn't have Pop's fingerprints somewhere, through a
Yeah.
coach, through a player, through the son of a player. I mean, so you have all of this going back to a guy who selflessly creates it and then doesn't take credit for it. And that's the next step. When he leaves, everybody's afraid it's going to go away. Well, the big three era's over and the culture hasn't changed. The players move in and out, but that development stays the same. And I don't think, Will and Becky are not ready to carry on the traditions, and that's what it is. You're going to take somebody who will carry on that tradition, who will actually treat the Spurs as a dynasty, um, and a cultural standpoint, than to say, well, this is the best coach that's available. Let's get this guy in here because he may be Derek Fisher for the
Yeah,
Knicks.
I totally agree with you, and I think it is really important that, yes, I mean, even if Pop leaves in a year or two, which could very well happen, the culture of this program and this franchise is just so deeply rooted and ingrained in the system that they have running. I don't expect them to look outward for a coach, unless it's someone like maybe a Brett Brown or an Ime Udoka, maybe. But I do think that the head coach is all, or the next head coach is on this roster, and yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that has made this Austin Spurs program so great is because it's consistent. I also think they have the benefit of just being right up I-35, right? They're right in Austin. And I think programs, like, I think at this point, if you're an NBA team and you don't have a G League program, or you do and it's not close to you, I'm not sure what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I think of teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have now the Oklahoma City Blue that literally play right across the street, right across the street. And then you've got a team like the Memphis Hustle. They play a few blocks away. So it just makes sense to have something like that in place. And I'm not sure why every team, hasn't caught on by now, because it seems like something they should do. I mean, Toronto, clearly they're on the train with that, but there are several teams who do not have an organization, a G League organization, or they don't utilize it correctly. Like when I'm looking at teams, and I'm not just saying this because I'm like a Spurs fan. I live in Dallas. I get to see the Mavericks all the time. I've gone to several Texas Legends games. I don't know what they're doing there. They have had a ton of guys go through there, but it's almost like you're going through the motions. You're there because you can't be here, but it's like not incredibly structured. Like they don't run the same plays. There's a lot of guys who get in the game. There's like 12, 13 guys who play every single game, and then they end up leaving. Like I forget his name off the top of my head. He plays for the Suns now. He's a point guard. Cam. Oh man, he went to Murray State. But my point being, he's on the Suns now. He went through that Texas Legends program. The Dallas Mavericks probably could have used another backup point guard. I mean, he didn't stick with them, right? He's on another team. Moses Brown was with them last year. Now he's on the Thunder. It just seems like they're not able to retain guys. They're not able to get their guys in that program and help them. And they didn't even go to the bubble, which is understandable. I mean, not every team wants to send a team to the bubble, but I love what the Spurs have done there. And now that we've kind of gone through what we love about the Austin Spurs, the guys that we like, we can kind of round back towards Luka, Tre, Quinndary, Weatherspoon. What did you like that you saw from those guys? Because I thought each and every one of them showed that they don't belong in the G League anymore. Like they could probably play for an NBA team right now.
Absolutely. Well, and the proof was two of them now do. I mean, they were pulled right back up. I mean, yeah, it took a kind of a little bit of a fate there with having the Spurs hit that COVID protocols, but Tre shows you something different every time he gets out there. And he gets out there for like a minute or 2 minutes in garbage time, or when the Spurs are blowing somebody out, he'd get out there for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And, he's got that cut to the basket that's kind of reminiscent of Parker. He's got the defensive mindedness. He's got a good 3-point shot. And I think the G League just really allowed him to go, I can show you exactly what I can do now, because now I'm running the game. He's going to be the best player on a G League team, or he's going to be, a second stringer on the Spurs right now. And I think that's great. I kind of was thinking about him in the terms of like Corey Joseph. It's like, Joe, you were talking about the strength of, why one program works and what doesn't. Well, the Spurs utilize the program, but then the players do too. Joseph was the first guy, if I remember, that asked to go back.
Yeah.
I want more playing time. I need more skill development. Sure, I'm getting a lot from being here, but why don't you let me go back there and really, really work this out? And I feel like Tre's already there. Like he's in the G League. He can master a lot of this stuff. He can run the team. He can anchor that whole entire squad. And at the same time, then just come right in and hey, if Patty's got to miss 3 games for something, he gets a stomach bug or something, you know what? We've got Tre. He's good to go. Luka, on the other hand, I was kind of starting to get on that, like, why are we keeping this guy around if we're not going to
Oh.
develop him? Like, I wasn't
Yeah.
hating, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and he has a special place in my heart because he's one of the first people I ever got to interview when I was in Salt Lake City. But I really kind of saw him, and there was a little bit of talk early on that he was going to be like a Davis Bertans. He was going to be like a 3-point, power forward. He wasn't going to be that heavy duty power forward that could stop LeBron in the paint, but he was going to come out there and he was going to hit threes and he was going to play. And then he came out in the bubble and didn't hit threes and wasn't making his shots. And I don't even think, I think he only started the last game in last season's bubble. I mean, he was not getting the same treatment that Pop was giving Keldon and Quinndary. And I was just like, why are they not pushing him? And I don't know what it was. It's kind of one of those, did Pop pull him aside like he did Kawhi in 2014 and say, do what you got to do, or had that private conversation with him that set him straight. But he just took off this season. I mean, he wasn't shining, and then he got there, and all of a sudden I was like, I was reading articles of, your articles, and so there's some others that came out. I was like, wait, what's going on with him? And all of a
Yeah.
sudden I'm catching the game, and I'm like, this is not the Luka Samanic I've seen in G League. It's not the same guy I've seen in the summer league. It's like he something clicked for him, and I think that's fantastic because you talk about trying to determine what to do without LaMarcus. Maybe this is the time to push him. I know they're saying, well, you can't expect high minutes from him. No, but behind Pirtle and Eubanks, he might be the next guy to kind of start filling that spot.
Yeah, yeah, and I wanted to talk about. We'll go back to Luka. I wanted to talk about Tre. I really like what you were talking about. Tre kind of shows you something different. I want him, and again, I don't have, like, I can't speak to the Spurs staff all the time. Like, I could sit in on a post press conference. That doesn't mean I'm going to get to ask a question. Just because you're there does not mean they are going to answer your question. They may deflect. So I kind of wonder, and I'm sure maybe you wonder this too. What players get access to Chip? Is it everybody? Does he have like a specific guy he works with for a season? I really don't know how that works, but if there was one guy I want to see work with Chip, it's Tre. He was a pretty good 3-point shooter in college, like 36% his last season at Duke, on pretty decent volume, like 3 to 4 attempts per game. In the bubble, he just abandoned it altogether. The first 2 games he shot like 2 or 3, then it was none. And so teams started playing him differently. And I think if he wants to maximize his potential, because I do truly believe he was a guy who went in the second round, but easily could have gone in the first round, to maximize his potential, he's going to have to figure that shot out. And I want to see him shoot it without hesitancy, right? Like, I don't care if it goes in or if it like bricks off the rim. I want to see him at least be willing to take it, like we see Luka willing to take it. Because in the bubble, dude was shooting like 5 threes per game at 29%. It was awful, but at least he was trying. And now that he's in the NBA, obviously limited sample size, 40%. And we'll hop back to Luka now. Yeah, the dude has looked completely different. And for me, it's the body language, right? No longer hanging the shoulders, the head. On the bench, he doesn't look sorry for himself. And he's running like full throttle effort. I made a video on him last year from what we saw in the bubble, and things I liked, things I didn't like. And it was like, I doubt he watched the video, but if he did, he completely hit the nail on the head on all the points that I wanted him to improve upon. And I really like, I like what I've seen from him. And the last guy I want to get your opinion on is Quinndary Weatherspoon. Now, he's somebody who I thought, oh, is he going to be on this team? And I still am kind of on the fence there. I don't know where he fits, but at least in the bubble, especially after going through COVID protocol, not playing most of the season because of the injury issues, because of the COVID protocol, he looked pretty dang good there. Like, he looked really solid. He looked like he picked up, some confidence in the bubble, and he didn't have a lot of time to do that either.
What did he just play that one game, right?
He
22
played the
points.
season finale, and then he played in the playoff game, and it was like 22 and then 26.
Yeah.
So it was 2 really solid outings from him.
He's a strange prospect in that, and I think you hit the nail on the head. The injuries and COVID has kept him out. I think the one game he played with the NBA, he fouled out in less than 10 minutes. He looked like he was ready for summer league with the 10 fouls and pulling it together. He looked fantastic last season at the end of the year in the bubble, but already had problems getting into the rotation. Yeah, we didn't have Patty in the bubble. We didn't have LaMarcus in the bubble, so it was really like a youth movement thing in the bubble at the end of last season. And he still had trouble kind of getting in there with Keldon blowing up, with Lonnie kind of, continuing what he was doing. And you've already got, DeJounte and Derek. So I feel like he's going to have trouble cracking in. I would say, unfortunately, I'd say he's going to be one of those guys that might fall off. He's going to be good. He's going to be good. He's going to play for somebody, and he might actually be better off being a second, bench guard for like a team that's in a rebuild, because he has the skill set, and he's too good for the G League, and he's not NBA ready. There's a weird sort of in between with him, and I would say, as far as a Spurs contract for next year, you have to see what happens with Patty. Patty's up for a new contract. I have every confidence the Spurs are going to give him a contract, and I just don't think that's going to open up a spot for Quinndary. And he's either going to be stuck on the bench, and this is his second two-way contract, which, unfortunately for him, he's pretty much gotten dropped on both years of his two-way. He couldn't maximize either season with all the COVID stuff. He couldn't. I mean, if he'd gone to the G League this season, I think we would have gotten a really good idea of what he was doing. But he started with injury, then the COVID protocols, and then now it's like he's just going to sit on the bench most of the rest of the season for the Spurs. And I don't think he's gotten a fair shake at all because of COVID, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think he is going to be one of those kind of unfortunate byproducts of depth and just bad timing. I like him. I think you're right. Like, I think he could probably find somewhere else where he's maybe with like a Thunder team that's rebuilding, like coming off the bench for them or something. But it's going to be really tough for him. I think he kind of has the same issues that Tre does in terms of shooting. Like, he's willing to shoot. That's the difference, but he's still not a great shooter. Obviously, very good finisher. I think he finished at like almost 60% in the G League these two games, and last season it was like 55%. So probably somewhere in the middle, which is still really good for kind of a combo guard guy, but just doesn't really have the vision. He is a combo guard. He's not really a shooting guard. He's not really a point guard. Really like him. I hope he sticks somewhere. And before we wrap up here, I wanted to talk just because for me, I've been trying to watch the Austin Spurs. Whether, I used to live in San Antonio. I'd been to a few games with my parents. They'd taken me when I was little. I want to talk about who's your favorite Austin Spur of all time. I'll let you go first, and then I'll go with mine because mine's a little bit more nostalgic. The guy was not really a good NBA player, but I want to hear who's your, favorite Austin Spur of all time.
Yeah, I was looking at the list of every guy who'd played in the G League and the NBA. I was going back and forth. I gotta say, there's two. I'll make one quick, and then one's personal and one's Spurs-rific. And the Spurs-rificness is Derek White. He did lead the team in 2018. I felt like their championship kind of rested on his shoulders, and I thought that was a perfect way to showcase that when he got to the NBA, when he got those real minutes, that he was capable of leading a team to a championship. That he needed to develop along with the league, and I still believe that. So he's one of my favorite players. He's the player I wanted to get my jersey of. He's that guy. On a personal note, when I was catching Austin Spurs games, I was always amazed by Jeff Ledbetter. The guy would come off the bench and just spark you with threes. And I started watching him in summer league, and I caught the Austin Spurs games. So I looked him up a couple of years ago, and there was nothing on him. He had a Facebook page, but there's no Wikipedia. So I reached out to him personally and asked him, could I kind of work on a small bio for him? And he said, sure. And he gave me the time when I was in Salt Lake City. At the end of the game, he met me. We went and sat and watched one of the other games, and he was eating. And of course, I got to sit in the team area. All the players were sitting there eating their food. But he just let me ask questions and kind of record it all. And I got to write a lot of it out. I wrote a piece about it, but I haven't finished doing anything bigger. And he had a really great relationship with the Spurs. I mean, he left one year and came right back, and they've allowed him to kind of stretch. He's older, so he's not going to hit that NBA stride that a lot of guys will get. but on a personal level, just taking the time to actually, sit and tell me his story. And I was following his career. It's just crazy where he went. And so that was for me on a personal one.
Yeah, I love Jeff Ledbetter. We've seen him in the summer league, we've seen him in Austin Spurs, and I think he's really important to what they had been doing, like just as a leader, right? They know he's not going to get to the NBA for them anytime soon. He's kind of like that Andre Ingram guy, where if he does, it's because the franchise wants to honor him in some sort of way. And I loved him. You're right. He kind of a spark plug as a 3-point shooter, good vocal leader, just a good like role model for a lot of these young guys who are coming in who just haven't had the structure of like a professional team yet. So I have a ton of respect for Ledbetter. Love White too. My mom went to CU Boulder, so we were Buffs fans. We were super excited when he got drafted. I didn't think he was going to get taken that early, so I was super happy when Derek came. One of my favorite players on this team. But my all-time favorite Austin Spur, it's ridiculous a little bit, but it's James Flight White. I loved James White when I was little. I remember he got brought up to the Spurs at the very end of the season. I think it was 2007. There was only a few games left. He goes off for like 17 points, and I was like, oh, this dude's a star. Yeah, I think I was maybe like 11 at the time, so I didn't know any better. But I was like, this dude he's getting up. He's like a Vince Carter. He's dunking. He's shooting threes. He was doing. In reality, he wasn't really like that great of a player. He was an amazing dunker, really famous for being a really great dunker, but not a great NBA player. But he was my favorite. I mean, I just thought he was really fun to watch. A really cool guy. If I had to throw anyone else out there, and I know this dude kind of has a love-hate relationship with Spurs Twitter, Spurs Nation, but Bryn Forbes, I really liked his story. I think he got a lot of hate last season, and I criticized Pop a little bit because I thought, this guy, they're making him overextend himself. Like, I think in a smaller role, like what we've seen from him in Milwaukee, perfect. But last year just kind of was overextended. Fans were frustrated because it's like, we want to see Lonnie, we want to see Keldon. And then we got Marco, we got Bryn. But I really loved Bryn's story. I mean, he went from being undrafted to the summer league, to the bench, eventually making his way to the starting lineup when they didn't have Derek and DeJounte for a bit. So there's always going to be like a special place for me for Bryn, because I really think he's kind of the epitome of the Austin Spurs system. Somebody who unheralded, worked hard in his body. I mean, added a ton of muscle, really tried to get everything out of the talent that he has. And I really truly think he did. I don't think he's going to get better than he is right now. I think he pretty much is what he is, but I just love his story. I really like him. Think that he's somebody who, when we look back a few years, we're not going to think of him as that guy who cost us a playoff run or something like that. I think Spurs fans in a few years will look back at him more favorably. And I think somebody like Anthony Mathis, I don't know if you got a chance to see him with the Austin
Loved him.
Spurs.
Yeah, I
Kind
actually
of
wrote a piece
similar.
about him.
Yeah. I mean, I think I read that. Like, he's a
Yeah.
little similar to him. I mean, obviously not a carbon copy, but very similar. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed covering the Austin Spurs this season. This was like kind of my first time covering a team since I was in college, which, shout out to the Mean Green. They made the March Madness tournament for the first time
Nice.
since 2010. Super excited for my alma mater. But thank you so much for joining me here. I love talking to you about the Spurs, especially the Austin Spurs. And this is kind of the point where I tell the guests, if you got anything to shout out or you have anything you want to plug, go for it, because you're the star of the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, I appreciate everything you're doing. I love that you've been working with Pound on the Rock. I think what you bring has upped my level at what I'm doing on Pounding the Rock, and so I'm glad to have this conversation. Finally, get to meet you and talk. I I have been kind of like a closet Austin Spurs fan because I don't get to do enough. But every time I get allowed to go in as a media person or something, it's been through the Austin Spurs, and so this was really a lot of fun. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you one more time for joining me. It was a lot of fun. And I thought, this, for people at home, like, this is the first time Jeph and I have ever talked. I thought we flowed super well.
Yeah,
It was a
absolutely.
blast talking about the Austin Spurs, and I love that I get to write with somebody who, you clearly know what you're talking about when you're writing about basketball, when
Thank
you're
you.
talking about basketball. I like your writing style, like everything you bring to Pounding the Rock. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this video. Like, subscribe, hit that notification button. If you want to know when the next video is dropping, leave me a comment. What do you want to see in the future? What do you like? What didn't you like? But until next time, Spurs fans, take care.